Absolutely. So I started getting interested in machine learning and computer science when I was an undergraduate at MIT. I was really interested in how we can build systems that learn through experience and learn from data and can perceive the world in a similar way to how humans perceive the world. So after that, I decided that I really wanted to do more machine learning, more artificial intelligence, and I think that right now, if you want to do that, like if you want to be at the forefront of that field, you should be doing research because there's definitely many open questions still, and so I decided to do a PhD. I completed my PhD at Berkeley last August, and I am now starting as faculty at Stanford University in September. And before that, right now, I'm spending some time at Google Brain doing research with all the research there, doing a mixture of artificial intelligence, machine learning, and robotics. I'm particularly interested in applying machine learning techniques and developing machine learning techniques to robots in the real world because it's something where you can see the robot learning in the physical world about objects, about how the world works, and it's, I think, an amazing test bed for studying some of the most fundamental problems in AI and machine learning. It's a setting that's very different from how humans learn in a way, and it's also in many ways impractical to be always learning from scratch, learning without any prior knowledge, and it means that we require these huge data sets in order to learn. Whereas with meta learning, the goal is to be able to use your previous experience, use data that you've seen before, so that when you see a new task, you can learn much more efficiently. You can learn with only a handful of examples rather than millions of examples. And so the way that we try to do this is we have the system, we collect data for a lot of different tasks, but only a small amount of data for each different task that we want the system to be able to do. In like a robotics context, one task might be grasping objects, another task might be sliding objects, or another task might be opening doors. And we want these systems to be able to use experience from all of these different types of tasks so that when we want the robot to do something new, it can learn it in a minute or less. And this is, beyond robotics, this is also applicable to so many other problems because there are so many settings where you can't collect millions of data examples. Like in medicine, for example, you don't have that much data for an individual patient. And so what you need to be able to do is use data and use experience from other patients, from other tasks, in order to make effective predictions from very small amounts of data in this new setting. Yeah, so right now, robots are most successful in factory settings where the setting is very controlled and you can essentially just program the robot to do one motion over and over again without any regard to what the environment is like and without any regard to being actually able to see the world in any way. They just are completely blind, performing this one thing over and over again. And where I see these technologies having a real impact is ultimately, in the long term, I want robots that can go into an environment they've never seen before and be able to adapt and perceive the world and use what they've perceived in order to act intelligently. And right now, the technology is nowhere near reaching that point. And I ultimately expect the kind of the first impact that we'll see of these types of methods in robotics will be still likely in factory settings, but in less controlled settings where the environment is changing a little bit or the objects that the robot is manipulating are changing a little bit. Like if a robot is manufacturing a car, for example, maybe there are slightly different tires or slightly different handles or something that the robot is working with, and we want them to be able to adapt to those different types of things. Yeah, I definitely think that there are a lot of concerns, like very valid concerns about artificial intelligence systems, including systems that are deployed today. This includes things like bias in systems. I think that that's especially problematic because we don't really have a full understanding of all of the machine learning systems that are being deployed and the effects that they will have when they are deployed. And I think that it's critical for us to be able to build that better understanding before actually having them impact people's lives. And so I think that that's probably the most pressing ethical challenge with regard to artificial intelligence. Yeah, and I think the ethical challenges, I think some of them are not I think the biggest challenges aren't always, some of them I think are portrayed accurately in the media, but there are other times when things seem to be a little bit off focused, I guess.
Yeah.
Like deploying systems for like criminal justice systems and insurance and loans. Like I think that those deploying AI in those systems are going to introduce bias if they are deploying the systems that we currently have today, and I think that's incredibly problematic. There are other things that that I think are overblown by the media in general, and such as like these. I don't think that these technologies are potentially as advanced as many people realize. Yeah. Basically because we have, well, my hypothesis is that humans naturally have they naturally anthropomorphize things. And if you see a robot doing a very complex task, you assume that, oh, it must be very smart, it must be able to do many, many different things. But in reality, it can only do that one very narrow thing, because that's exactly what it was trained for. And so in that sense, the robots and the systems that we have today appear very impressive, when in reality they are actually much dumber than you might imagine. Yeah, I think it's a really exciting environment to be a part of. There's so much amazing research that's going on at Google in a breadth of different areas, including things like robotics, including things like language, like vision, like medicine. And it's nice to be a part of that and interact with people from a variety of different areas and fields. I talked about this a bit before in terms of like, the goal of meta learning is not to build specialized systems that learn a single task from massive amounts of data, but instead to reuse experience and be able to learn new tasks much more quickly by leveraging previous knowledge, previous experience. And I think that like a good analogy here is that many machine learning systems today they're trained on a single task, a single very narrow task, a very complex task. And it's kind of like asking a baby right when it's born to learn how to play Go without understanding the world, without understanding physics, or even knowing how to manipulate objects or walk even. And instead, like, it seems quite strange to do that if you think about it that way, to just say, okay, you're gonna learn this one extremely narrow task and that's the only thing that you're going to learn about. Because I think these systems, if we only have them do one thing, they're gonna be very brittle. They aren't going to be able to understand what is happening if something changes. Or if they're in a slightly different situation, they can't handle it. And for example, a lot of machine learning systems that can translate from like one language to another language can't even like tell you a story or comprehend like a news article, for example. And so my vision is to be able to create machine learning systems and artificial intelligence systems that can have a more general understanding of the world. And by doing that, or kind of the way that initial step towards doing that is by building these systems that can leverage a lot of previous experience to more quickly learn new tasks, so that they're not learning from scratch for every single individual task. And so roughly the way that we do that is we train these systems to be able to learn new concepts from small amounts of data. So we'll give them a few images of different objects or different animals, and have them try to be able to distinguish those animals or those objects in new examples only from that very small data set. And we'll do this for many, many different types of concepts, so that when it sees a new concept, it can understand that concept with only a few examples. Yeah, one of the challenges that you might not necessarily expect actually from actually deploying these types of algorithms is that if we want a system to have a lot of different previous experience, you need to have it try to perform many different types of tasks, so that when it sees a new task, it can learn that very quickly. Now, one natural question is, what should those previous tasks even be? What task should it be practicing so that when it sees a new task, it can learn it very quickly? And that's actually quite a challenging problem. We typically have kind of one thing that we want to do, and we collect data for that and do it. Whereas in this setting, we say, okay, we want to do a lot of different things, and now we have to actually make a lot of different data sets for all the different types of things that we might want it to do. And so one of the techniques that we've been looking at recently is to try to have the agent, the machine learning system, actually come up with its own tasks. and see if it can come up with different things that it should do, and have it actually design its own problems, so that when it sees a new problem, it basically can practice all the problems that it has come up with, so that when it sees a new problem, it can solve it more efficiently. Absolutely. So if all of the kind of supervision and tasks is coming from a single person, it's going to be tailored towards that person's preferences and the things that that person wants from the robot. And so ultimately, I think that we need to be gathering supervision from many different people so that the agent can learn to adapt to different people's preferences and what different people want from the robot. And I think that scaling it towards that type of supervision will be something that's challenging, but something that will be important towards making such a robot actually useful for a wide variety of people. So I would say that this is actually part of my motivation for staying in academia, is that you don't have to worry as much about kind of making money for a company, basically, and you can study the fundamental problems that you can study kind of whatever problems you want, as long as you can get funding for it from some agency, and that agency could be the federal government, it could be companies if it somewhat aligned with their interests. You can basically get funding from a number of different sources, and fortunately, at least in the US, there are agencies that do fund fundamental research towards building robots that are useful for many different situations. I certainly do think that, I guess one thing that I like about the current atmosphere is that there are a lot of companies that are funding very fundamental research. For example, the research that I'm doing at Google, some of it may make it into a product at some point, but they're also supportive of the research that I do that is much more basic and is looking much more long-term than a product in the next month or the next 2 months. And it's not just Google that's sponsoring this type of research. There are other companies too, like Facebook, like Uber, for example. And I think that has really enabled the artificial intelligence research community to bloom and to be able to really study not just the really application-centric questions, but the more fundamental questions in artificial intelligence. Yeah. So I think that one really important question that I'm interested in studying more in the next year is how we can build systems that can learn without large amounts of supervision. This is getting back a little bit to the question that you had about how what the big challenges in these meta learning systems are is the tasks and ultimately the supervision. If we need a human to be in the loop really heavily, then it requires a significant amount of human effort for one, but it also introduces potentially biases, and it introduces it introduces a reliance of the system on the supervision from the human. If it can instead learn from its own experiences, come up with its own tasks, and be able to learn about the world in a more general way, just from interacting with the world, then I think that these systems will be much more scalable.